A very good morning to one and all present here. A very warm welcome to the second day of the 34th Annual Conference of Karnataka State Chartered Accountants Association. We hope each of you enjoyed the sessions yesterday, which had a gamut of topics ranging from arbitration to succession to cryptos to the enthralling stories of the Zealous series. We promise you the second day has many more exciting topics, followed by a superb entertainment and cultural dhamaka, including the marvelous magic show by the India's Got Talent fame Kudroli Ganesh, to end the conference on a magical note with your families. Once again, we at KCA thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday with us. We begin our day with a very special session, Bharath to India
to Bharath. This session is dedicated in memory of Jnanasagara late CAS Krishnaswamy by the family members of CAS Krishnaswamy, old students and staff of Krishnaswamy and Co., organized by CA Devendrappa, who has been associated with him for 36 years. We have a very interactive and innovative session, Bharat to India to Bharat, the journey from a colonial mindset to reclaiming it the Bharat way. I request CA Devendrappa, who has been associated with late Jnanasagara CA Krishnaswamy sir for 36 years, to escort our distinguished speaker, Shri J. Sai Deepak, onto the dais and welcome him with a bouquet. Welcome, sir. If I could give a brief overview of our distinguished speaker, Advocate J. Sai Deepak, all the way from New Delhi. Sai Deepak is an engineer turned law firm partner turned arguing counsel. In close to 13 years of his practice, Sai has carved a niche for himself in civil commercial litigation, IP litigation, constitution law, competition law, with reported judgments to his credit appearing before various judicial fora. He is an avid legal commentator and has articles to his credit in reputed international journals. An interesting fact is that as a law student, his blog post on the Bajaj TVS patent dispute was cited extensively and relied upon by the division bench of the Madras High Court to vacate the injunction granted by the single judge. He in fact is the author of the bestseller, India That is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution, published by Bloomsbury in 2021. Once again, we welcome you, sir. As you're aware, this session is dedicated in the memory of the man, the legend himself, late CAS Krishnaswamy, the Jnanasagara for us. For the benefit of the audience, let me give a brief introduction about the man who needs no introduction. Shri Krishnaswamy Srikanta Iyer was born on November 1st, 1928 to Srimati Kamalambal and Shri Srikanta Iyer as the first son. He completed his secondary and intermediary education in Government High School and Sahyadri College, Shivamogga, and he did his BSc with CBZ graduation at Central College. It is a matter of astonishment that he did graduated with CBZ and he became a chartered accountant. He did his articleship in Ramadhyani and Co., shifted to Fraser and Ross, Bangalore, and passed the CA in 1953, one of the first batches of CA post the Chartered Accountants Act being passed by the Parliament. He has worked in Fraser and Ross for 2 years and started practice in his own name of S. Krishnaswamy and Co. at Shivamogga in 1955 and opened another office in Bengaluru in 1971. Even though Jnanasagara Krishnaswamy sir is not present physically with us, his fragrance in the form of experience, the
knowledge that he has shared is always with us. He has delivered lectures in various forums, including the visiting faculty of National Law School. He has authored many books, including KSCA Journal, and he has also been the member standing committee on international financial standard codes and advisory group on bankruptcy laws, and which was set up by the Reserve Bank of India. It is heartening to state that, to mull over, remember his association with the professionals, the KSCA has graciously taken meaningfully appropriate decision to name one of the sessions in each yearly annual state conference after him. In fact, he was a person with an extremely calm demeanor who has given wings to fly to many people. And I'm glad to say that many of us who have been touched by his grace
are present here today in the audience. Anybody who has interacted with him invariably has observed in him, if I could use his name as an acronym, where each letter of his name means something. K for knowledgeable person, R for rational, remembering to help others, I for being interpretative and imaginative, and S for being supportive, as we all know, H for being a humble person with high thinking and simple living, N for a natural, neat, never give up attitude, and A for being articulate, assertive, yet not aggressive. S for the sense of proportion and the sensitivity to situation, and W for being a weighted talker, water-like flowing knowledge and wisdom. And A being active till his last breath, and M being a meticulous planner, and Y being always being young in mind and being a yardstick to all the emerging professionals. He was not simply living, but he lived simply and meaningfully. He used to be a bit worried whenever it came to the lapses affecting the CA profession's reputation. He always endorsed the view that after becoming CA, try to remain as a CA. He used to say that nobody can become perfect and that living luxuriously is very easy, but to live simple is very difficult. So in a nutshell, he has become an example for the statement that he used to always quote is, remember the day when you're born, all are laughing and you're crying. But lead such a life that when all are crying, you are permanently laughing at them, indicating live like him. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a huge round of applause for CA Krishnaswamy sir. In this memory, we have a message, a video by CA Allama Prabhu MS, past president KSCA. If we could play the video.
ಅಜಾತಶತ್ರು ಎಂಬ ವಿಶೇಷ ಪದವಿದೆ. ಅರ್ಥಾತ್ ಯಾರ ಶತ್ರು ಇನ್ನು ಹುಟ್ಟಿಯೇ ಇಲ್ಲವೋ ಅವನು ಅಜಾತಶತ್ರು. One whose enemy is yet to be born is known as ಅಜಾತಶತ್ರು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಯೇ ನಮ್ಮ ಜ್ಞಾನಸಾಗರ ಶ್ರೀ ಕೃಷ್ಣಸ್ವಾಮಿ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಮಿತ್ರರೇ, ಶತ್ರುಗಳು ಯಾರು ಇರಲೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ನಿರಂತರ ಅಧ್ಯಯನದಿಂದ ಬಹುವಿದ್ಯಾ ಪಾರಂಗತರಾಗಿ ಬಹುಮುಖ ಪರಿಣಿತಿ ಪಡೆದಂತ ಮೇಧಾವಿ, ಪುರಾಣ ಪುಣ್ಯಕಥೆಗಳ ಆದಿಯಾಗಿ ಪ್ರಚಲಿತ ವಾಣಿಜ್ಯ ವಿದ್ಯಮಾನಗಳವರೆಗೂ ಅವರು ನಡೆಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಆಳವಾದ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ವಿಶೇಷ, ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟ ಮತ್ತು ವಿಸ್ಮಯಕರವಾಗಿದೆ. ಸಮರ್ಥವಾದ ಅವರ ಆಲೋಚನಾ ಶಕ್ತಿಗೆ ತಲೆ ತೂಗಿದವರೇ ತಮ್ಮ ದಿಲಿ ವಿವೇಚನೆಯಿಂದ ಪ್ರತಿ ಮಾತನ್ನು ತೂಗಿ ನುಡಿಯುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಆ ನಿಲುವು, ಹಿರಿಯರಿಗೂ ಗೌರವ ತೋರುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಆ ಆತ್ಮೀಯತೆ, ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ಅವರ ಸಹಚರ್ಯ ಪಡೆದವರೆಲ್ಲರ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲೂ ಇನ್ನೂ ಅಚ್ಚರಿಯತೆ ಹಸಿರಾಗಿಯೇ ಉಳಿದಿದೆ. ತಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಬುದ್ಧ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯಗಳನ್ನು ಇತರರೊಂದಿಗೆ ವಿನಿಮಯ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಆ ಸೌಜನ್ಯದ ರೀತಿ, ವಿನಯ ವಿನೋದಗಳ ಛಾತಿ, ಇವುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳುಗರಿಗೆ ರಸಾನುಭವದ ದಾರಿ ಯಾವ ಅಧಿಕಾರಕ್ಕಾಗಲಿ ಪುರಸ್ಕಾರ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ ಪದವಿ ಪ್ರಶಂಸೆಗಳಿಗಾಗಲಿ ಅವರು ಆಸೆ ಪಡೆದೇ ಗಡಿಯಾರದ ಉಳಿದಂತೆ ಕರ್ತವ್ಯನಿಷ್ಠರಾಗಿ ತುಂಬು ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸಿದ ಕರ್ಮಣ್ಯೇವ ಅಧಿಕಾರಸ್ಥೆ ಆತ್ಮಲೇಶ ಕಥಾಚನ ಎಂಬ ಗೀತವಾಣಿಯನ್ನು ನಂಬಿದ್ದ ಧರ್ಮಕರು ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಪಾತ್ರರಾಗಿ ಅಂತರಂಗ ಬಹಿರಂಗಗಳ ಭೇದವಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಸಾತ್ವಿಕ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳಿಗೆ ಮಹತ್ವ ನೀಡಿ ಸ್ಫಟಿಕೋಪಮ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಇವರು ನುಡಿದಂತೆ ನಡೆದು ಸಾರ್ಥಕ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸಿದ ಸಾಧಕ ನಿಂತಲ್ಲೇ ಷಟ್ಸ್ತರವನ್ನು ಕಾಂಬರಯ್ಯ ಎಂಬ ವಚನ ಧರ್ಮದ ಮಾತಿಗೆ ಸೂಕ್ತ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಯಾಗಿಯೇ ಜೀವನ ಸಾಗಿಸಿದರು. ಸದಾ ಹಸನ್ಮುಖರಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಆದರದಿಂದ ಆತ್ಮೀಯತೆಯಿಂದ ವಾತ್ಸಲ್ಯದಿಂದ ನೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಜ್ಞಾನಸಾಗರ ಶ್ರೀ ಕೃಷ್ಣಸ್ವಾಮಿಯವರನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಅಪಾರ ಕೊಡುಗೆಯನ್ನು ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಮರಿಸುತ್ತಿರುವುದು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರಶಂಸನೀಯ. ತಂಪು ಹೊತ್ತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನೆನೆಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಬೇಕಾದ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ಜೀವನ ನಡೆಸಿದ ಪರಿಪೂರ್ಣ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಧನ್ಯತಾ ಭಾವದಿಂದ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಸ್ಮರಿಸಿದರು.
I now request our session speaker, Shri Deepak sir, to address the gathering.
Namaskara. I hope I'm audible. Yes, okay. So, I'd inform the organizers that in the interest of giving the audience an opportunity to interact with me more, I will keep my introductory lecture, so to speak, for just about 10 or 15 minutes, and the rest of it is going to be an interactive session where I will be taking questions from the audience as much as possible. The idea is to give everybody an opportunity to ask something that is relevant to the theme, because I think it becomes boring after a point to just treat it as a monologue. So I'm someone who comes out best when I'm faced with a lot of tough and uncomfortable questions. So I might as well convert this into a slightly provocative session and see how many questions I get, which push me to thinking on my feet. So as far as the title of the topic is concerned, I think it's fairly clear as to what the message is. That perhaps Bharat is witnessing a certain degree of cultural resurgence and renaissance, if I may call it, wherein after centuries, or at the very least after a couple of decades, it is beginning to wake up to its roots. So the title is largely derivative from the title of my book, which is called India That Is Bharat. Rest assured, I'm not trying to sell the book here. The idea is to basically say that there was perhaps a particular phase in Bharat's history where the very identity of being a Bharatiya was perhaps submerged under multiple layers of imposed identities. And gradually, at least over the last decade or so, Bharat is rediscovering its Bharatiyata, not just in the cultural sphere, but also in the political sphere, in the academic sphere, and in the realm of science and other places. Because whenever we discuss the contributions of this particular society, we typically limit it primarily to spirituality, religion, and whatnot. When the fact of the matter is, it has contributed across the board, including when it comes to education and science. At a time when we speak of a knowledge-based economy, I don't think there is any society which is better placed to don the mantle of a knowledge-based society, simply because Bharat has always been a knowledge-based society. In fact, for all practical purposes, we don't consider our dharma as religion. You actually think of it as the science of pursuit of liberation, so to speak. In that sense, it's a knowledge structure. That is precisely why you establish teaching traditions to pass on this particular knowledge structure, and therefore the origins of the Guru Shishya Parampara themselves can be traced to your belief that this is a particular science that can be replicated over generations. So, for all practical purposes, I think this is a society that believes in, how do I put it, seeking and belief going hand in hand. So these days there's a very fashionable statement that is typically made in the context of Hindu dharma, which is that we are not believers, we are seekers. And we are people who are in the pursuit of the ultimate truth. I don't think it's possible to seek without an element of belief. Belief and knowledge, or rationality or logic and intuition always go hand in hand. The tendency to bifurcate intuition from logic and to see them as two different boxes and in the form of binaries is largely a Western construct, where you think of intuition being devoid of logic and logic being devoid of intuition. But the fact of the matter is both of them complement each other. So I don't think there is a better system which explains this complementarity than the Hindu system. So the most popular example that I usually give is, while mathematics as a logic, unless and until you buy the premise that there is something called as the zero and there is something called as the one, it is not possible for you to build the logical structure over and above 0 and 1. You have to believe that there is something called as shunya and there is something called as unity for it to come together. So the idea that I have been trying to propagate, at least over the last 2-3 years, is that perhaps this is one of the rare opportunities that history is presenting in the form of a time window for Bharatiyas to rediscover their origins and their roots without being ashamed of it, without being bashful about it, without being coy about it. And the best part is, there is a demographic dividend that Bharat is currently enjoying in the form of a fantastic young population, which goes hand in hand with the explosion of technologies such as the internet and social media, which makes it possible for this young population to grasp and gather as much information as possible. But the problem is that the very same technologies could also be used for consuming garbage and filth. So that's where perhaps I think it's important for us to try and push them in the right direction. The book that I wrote last year was a step in that particular direction. I have said this as much in multiple speeches as well as in the book, that I did not write the book as an expert on the subject. So there are 3 different aspects that the book tries to cover: history, political science, and the constitution. As far as political science and history are concerned, I think of myself as an untrained student. As far as his law is concerned or constitution is concerned, I think of myself as a trained student, still not an expert. These days, I think there is a tendency to use the word expert very, very loosely. And I don't think it should be used loosely. So I choose not to give myself that particular label. And whenever someone tries to do so, I actively refuse it, not out of a sense of false modesty, but because I believe that when you come from a particular tradition where every title is to be earned after years of sadhana, the word expert should also be given after years of sadhana and not at the outset. So, since this happens to be a special session that is dedicated in the memory of Shri Krishnaswamy, it becomes all the more imperative to learn from his life. Because I was just going through the profile that was shared with me. For someone to retain his zest for knowledge, even in his 90s or let's say late 80s, I think is a huge achievement. There are very few people who I think have managed to do that. I had the benefit and the good fortune of seeing Mr. Ram Jethmalani in action in his final years when he came out of retirement. This was a period when the Supreme Court had started introducing mics and speakers in the courtrooms. But the one person who never needed a mic or a speaker was Mr. Ram Jethmalani, even at his fag end of his career. I don't think there was ever a fag end of his career because he chose voluntarily to step out of it. Otherwise, people were still willing to engage him. You could hear him educating the Chief Justice from outside the courtroom. So the central hall of the Supreme Court is a fairly huge room. And you have to climb the stairs to go up to the court. Perhaps that also indicates the difficulty of the journey in getting justice in this country. So if you stand at the bottom of the stairs, rest assured, if it's Mr. Jethmalani who is arguing inside court number 1, you can hear him whether the mic is on or not. It wouldn't make a difference. And imagine if the courtroom is packed, you typically expect some kind of murmurs and whatnot, but when he spoke, it was completely silent, pin drop silence. So you have Mr. Ram Jethmalani there. The other person that I've looked up to over the years is, of course, Mr. Nani Palkhiwala. One of the reasons for looking up to him is not because of his strength in the law. If you're a lawyer and if you happen to have law as one of your areas of core competence, I don't think it's that big a deal. I understand that there's a certain amount of effort that goes into this. But most people don't understand his journey, and I am able to relate to the journey for a very different reason altogether. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but he suffered from a speech impairment, which is he used to stammer initially. So he overcame that, made the transition to law from being a lecturer of a different subject, started off with taxation, then moves to constitutional law, and his grasp on both constitutional law and economics in general was so stellar that after the speech delivered on the budget by the finance minister, the second most listened to speech was of Mr. Nani Palkhiwala in a stadium, in the Brabant Stadium. Imagine people turning up in huge numbers at a stadium to listen to a lawyer speak on economics and the budget. It's difficult to find such an audience for the most popular of topics today, even today, but for someone to actually manage to grab the attention of the people speaks volumes of his commitment to the subject and also his ability to break it down for the lay audience. That's where I think the trick lies. Because it's easy for anybody to simply showcase their knowledge and jump to 60,000 feet without ever being able to relate to the audience. So you may end up impressing the audience, you may end up intimidating the audience, but have you been able to relate to the audience, and have you been able to make the subject relatable to the audience? I think that is what distinguishes an average speaker from a born public speaker who is able to break it down for people to understand. These are people that I've typically been able to relate to. So I think from the profile of Sri Krishna Swami, who I did not have the good fortune of meeting, he seems to fall into the same category. So, coming back to the topic or the theme of this particular session, the attempt over the last few years has been to try and bust a lot of misconceptions in the mind of the current generation so that when they embark on their professional journeys, they do so with a certain degree of originality. I'll try and connect two aspects. One is individual psychology with a professional journey. As a student of intellectual property law, one of the things that I've always wondered is, for a society that worships knowledge and for a society that has produced the finest of literature in every branch of knowledge, why is it that so-called modern independent India has struggled with the concept of innovation? Because if someone tells me today that Bharath is an innovative society, I would say I disagree. Bharat is an entrepreneurial society. It is still not an innovative society, at least as on date. It may have been an innovative society at some point, but today it is not. And even when it comes to the use of the word entrepreneur, I'd be extremely careful, because for all practical purposes, we may have produced a lot of traders. I'm not exactly sure if we've produced entrepreneurs, there being a very clear distinction between the two. Someone who deals in goods and services can be called a trader, but someone who chooses to come out with a specific product which the market has not seen is showing a certain degree of enterprise and initiative. That's what distinguishes an entrepreneur from a trader. Now, are there cultural reasons for this? Does this mean that culturally we are fundamentally incapable of coming out with new products and services? The answer seems to be a no. But the question still remains, then what explains the current situation or the current state of affairs? My analysis of this particular problem tells me that when you constantly teach multiple generations that they come from a subjugated and a defeated society, and everything that they enjoy is the product of Western civilization, and there is nothing of value that they have ever produced for the world's consumption, you effectively rob that society of its collective self-confidence and self-esteem, but you also rob the society of its individual self-esteem and dignity. There are enough studies in psychology which clearly say that the group psychology is a reflective or an agglomeration of individual psychology and vice versa. It works both ways. And ultimately, when it comes to nurturing a certain sense of self-confidence, I would say there are three different variables that effectively have a bearing on this. The first is the family unit. The second is the societal unit. But the third most important component, which I think is constantly underestimated, is the education system. If on a daily basis, in a particular system, which is treated as the benchmark of your intelligence, how do you perform in a particular system becomes a representation of your level of achievement and who you are as a person. And if that system constantly drills in your head through the education system, that as a society, you're a second-rate society. As a culture, you've been a defeated civilization. It is extremely difficult to hope that such a society will produce something innovative. Even if there are individuals who come out of such a society who produce innovative goods and services, it is despite the education system and not because of the education system. Which is to say that they have managed to survive the serious inferiority complex that the education system itself cultivates. Now, I wanted to ask myself whether this is a phenomenon that is limited to Bharat alone, or is this something that extends to other communities and other societies which have also witnessed colonization. So it is in that particular process I wrote the book, which clearly shows that there are perhaps two categories of societies who have undergone colonization. Ones who, after achieving independence, immediately addressed their education system so that they reconnect with their roots after the colonizer has vacated the place politically. And the second category of society, which continues with the colonizer's education system even after having achieved political independence. Bharat, according to me, effectively comes under the second category, which is to say that it has not invested enough efforts to reconnect with its roots through an education system after independence. It has effectively taken forward the policy that was placed in public domain in 1835 by the British establishment, which is to say replace traditional systems and also replace the medium of education. So in the book, there is a particular chapter where I specifically cite a letter from a collector of Bellary who writes to his superiors, effectively capturing the curriculum which was being taught across the schools here, from Vyakarana to Mahabharata to Shastras to trigonometry to architecture, everything was being taught, and the important part is it was being taught to all the Chaturvarnas contrary to popular opinion. From 1835 onwards is when effectively the downfall begins. You have to realize 1835 is a significant period for one important reason, that you're looking at a society that has managed to retain its educational structure, its core educational structure, after close to 700 to 800 years of repeated invasions, which is even after invasions from the 8th century onwards until 1835, for close to 1,000 years, you have retained your educational system. That speaks volumes of the strength of your society to retain its core knowledge structure. The replacement starts after 1835. And by the time we are in the 1900s, an inspector of schools from Eastern Bengal writes this in the context of comparing the Hindu society and the Muslim society of that particular period. He specifically makes the point that the Hindu society embraced English education with open arms. And the first generation was perhaps comfortable speaking in both English as well as in the mother tongue. But by the time the second generation was educated in English, it had even forgotten its ability to spell their own names in their mother tongues. Now, this was in the 1900s. We are in 2022. Imagine the number of generations that have passed ever since the introduction of this particular education system. And ask yourself if the state of affairs that meet the eye are attributable to the education system directly. If the impact of the education system was felt so deeply within 2 generations, you're at least 11 generations since the introduction of the education system. I'll give you a very clear example. So if you go to the Madras High Court or the Karnataka High Court, where they have pictures and busts of, let's say, past chief justices and let's say prominent lawyers, you will see them wearing the dhoti, the black coat and the turban. Typically the dress in which we remember Shri Vishveshwaraya, right? Try and ask yourself if you can find a similar attire in any of these courts today. So 3 weeks ago in the Delhi High Court, there was a young boy who was a junior practitioner who mustered the guts to actually wear the dhoti along with the black coat, and he entered into the courtroom. I don't think even an alien would have drawn as many stairs. And had he done the same thing perhaps in United States or United Kingdom, being an Indian, there is a decent chance that they may have welcomed it and celebrated it as a sign of cultural diversity. But in the land of dhotis, he was effectively the subject of an odd kind of attention. To my mind, although the example is superficial and perhaps crude, it tells you the extent of the problem. It tells you the degree of the problem. So here's a simple question to the audience. When someone asks you to dress up to a particular place in formals, what dress do you associate with a formal attire? Pant, shirt and suit, that's it, right? Why is there no concept of an Indian formals? That's the problem. So the idea behind the book is to try and connect the colonized state of the Bharatiya society with its constitutional journey and say, if that was the impact of the colonial education system in the early 1900s, how do you expect the constitution to connect to Bharat's roots when perhaps it is taking forward the legacy of the colonizer? I have not arrived at a conclusion, I have merely posed a question in the book. And since it happens to be a trilogy, I will hopefully have some answers by the time I complete the trilogy. So that is more or less the saransh or the gist of this trilogy, which is to try and identify the factors which led to the constitution. So typically when you talk to constitutional lawyers, the tendency is to look at the document as a legal document. It is not a legal document. It is a socio-politico-legal document. Because the constitution effectively represents the culmination of a society's journey at a given point of time. Therefore, it is heavily influenced by the history of that particular point of time. So when someone worships the constitution, or someone says this is the ultimate book that all of us must surrender to and submit to and do Sashtanga Namaskara, I end up saying, I'm sorry, it's a hardcore historical and political document. And therefore, it is always subject to the ravages of time and history. So be extremely wary of surrendering to a particular document. Respect the document simply because it happens to be a product of your journey. But always realize that the Constitution is the product of history. History is not the product of the Constitution. So whenever you look at the Constitution, your first prism or the first lens through which you look at the Constitution must be, and should be the history of that particular period first. Without that, your understanding of the Constitution is extremely truncated. How many students of law do we have here? Chartered accountants are anyway semi-students of law. How many pure students of law do we have here? Someone who's done their LLB. Okay. So whenever you talk to students of law and you ask them, how do you make sense of a particular provision of the Constitution, the immediate tendency is to go to the Constituent Assembly debates. To see, let us see what the debates say. Just as you look for parliamentary debates, if at all there is an ambiguity in a statutory provision, similarly when there is a certain interpretational problem with respect to the Constitution, you look at the Constituent Assembly debates. But the debates only tell you what was discussed. The debates don't tell you why were people thinking in a certain manner. So over the last few years, I think there has been a sudden discussion around making Sanskrit perhaps the national language of the country so that it can be spoken across the country as a replacement for perhaps Hindi or English. And this debate seems to be, it's a recurring debate constantly over every few years it comes about for one reason or the other. So there is a well-known lawyer in the Supreme Court and who is also an MP from Puri, Shri Pinaki Mishra, whose father, Lokanath Mishra, was one of the members of the Constituent Assembly. He was the first one to propose Bharat as a replacement for India when Article 1 was being drafted. When Shri Ambedkar was putting together the constitution after he received the first draft, he did not have Bharat in mind at all. He simply called India a union of states. There was no reference to Bharat, there was no reference to Hindustan, there was no reference to Bharatvarsha, nothing. Lokanath Mishra suggests, when you are putting together the constitution for an independent republic after independence, why are we going with the name India? How is this an Indian name? How is this a Bharatiya name? So therefore an amendment is proposed, Bharat. Now how many people who are attending this particular session go by two names in public? I would like to understand if there is any individual who is present in this room who goes by two official names in public. Oh really? Okay. Is that part of the same name? No. Okay. Is it a normal thing for a person to have two names in public? Okay. Shouldn't the very same logic be extended and applied to a country as well as to why does it subscribe to two names, India and Bharat? That itself shows a multiple personality disorder. So that's the point of the book, to say that there is a consciousness problem where you seem to have two different identities. Although Article 1 says India, that is Bharat, why do you need two names which say one is the same as the other? Why can't it be one? How was the choice even made? And how many countries do we know of in the world which have two names? So clearly there is a fundamental problem, which is to say that your psychology is a divided psychology. And the divided psychology has to be traced to history, your education system, and multiple factors. So that is the essence of this entire so-called not so academic exercise. And the hope is that from Bharat to India was a painful journey. From India to Bharat will again be a painful journey. But hopefully this will be a journey for eternity, and hopefully this will be a journey for the better. Hence the title of the topic. Now I open this up for questions. I have just one request, and I make this request across the board. Introduce yourself. In the interest of giving others an opportunity to ask questions, do not come out with long-winded comments. Keep your questions short. I understand that as Indians, we believe in Brahma Muhurta, therefore time goes on, but we don't have time for eternity here. So keep it short and kindly try and keep the tone civil. The questions can be uncomfortable, the tone can be civil. Please.
Myself, Ashok Agrawal, I am chartered accountant.
Yes, sir.
My question is that, taking the clue from your total discussions, just like few countries in the world, like Burma has been changed to Myanmar, Siam has been changed to Indonesia. Similarly, still if we can make the corrections and instead of the two names, we can do, like in so many, even the states, towns names is being changed. Directly we can make only one name from India to Bharat.
So, I'm sure you're aware of the number of changes of names that have taken place in Uttar Pradesh. Allahabad has become Prayag and all that has happened. I don't think it's a question of whether there is a legal way of doing it. I think it's a question of whether the society wants it and whether the society sees value in it. Because the very first resistance to such change of name comes from us, not from anybody else. The ones to first of all raise a red flag, and I mean that in every possible sense, are people who are the colonized people who think of themselves as freed people. Otherwise, frankly speaking, how difficult is it to simply move an amendment to change the name? You have to realize it's not just a question of changing the name, it's a question of changing the mindset, changing the thought process, which means changing the way you see yourself first. So that is the deeper change, and that is perhaps the most essential change. When that change happens, I think this change is obvious and simple. The controversies that all of us are witnessing on a daily basis today on primetime television, I don't wish to wade into any controversial topic unless the audience invites me to wade into it, is a clear reflection of the fact that all we have perhaps achieved is political independence but not psychological independence. So the answer to your question is, it is possible, it should be possible, but I think the barrier is within and it is mental. Next.
Hi, Sai Deepak. This is Nitesh here. I'm a chartered accountant. I'm a big fan of you. I follow you on Twitter. I follow all the videos. Especially, I would like to highlight two things. One, the debate between Mr. Subramanian Swamy and Owaisi on Arda. The way you handle that is, I request all the members over here to watch that video. Second one, the Kashmir Files, when it was released, you said that if anybody wanted to stop the film, it has to pass through me.
Right.
That is a hard-hitting statement, I can say.
Thank you.
Now, coming to the question, you have been following the Mathura and Gyan Vapsi.
Right.
Yesterday, the Place of Worship Act, an important observation has been made by Mr. Justice Chandrachud,
Right.
stating that for determining the place, whether it has to be temple or no, the Place of Worship Act doesn't place any role.
Correct.
But considering the fact that the way Ram Janmabhoomi took it so many years, I wanted to know whether before I retire from my profession, am I able to see Kashi Vishwanath as well as Mathura temple?
Okay. So first question, if it's okay with you, please hand over the mic to him. I just want to have a short conversation with him. How serious are you about seeing this in your lifetime?
Very serious.
Very serious. What are you willing to do for that?
I'm educating amongst my friends and
Right.
circle that you need to be decolonized, like
Right.
the way what you always preach for.
Right.
And yes, that is the most important thing right now I'm doing.
Okay. Someone chooses to give you free electricity and says, forget about Places of Worship Act. What is your choice?
I wouldn't take that.
Okay. Is it because you're fairly well off?
It's not because of that. I wanted to work hard and earn myself. I
Right.
do not want to live upon the...
Okay. Now, the reason why I've asked these questions is this. Now, I come from a particular part of the country where the person has offered free electricity. And in the process, under his tenure, he has allowed communal riots to take place
Yes.
in the capital of the country. To the extent that on the Republic Day, the tricolour was taken off from the Red Fort.
And when the US president was there.
Exactly, right? Now, it's easy for me to blame one particular individual, but that individual has been offered as a choice by the society. After all, it's a democracy still. Fortunately or unfortunately, the future will decide. But such an option has been elected with a fairly clear majority twice, where not in some remote part of the country, but in the capital of the country. So what does that tell you about our priorities? So here's the thing. I think it's important to realize two things. One, allow me to use the word Hindu society now. The Hindu society is fundamentally capable of generating wealth. You did that even under the license permit Raj. Liberalization only unleashed your innate potential. It did not create a potential, it liberated that potential. Even in the worst of times, Artha has always been in the hands of this community. That's a fact. If the society manages to retain this sense of self-confidence and also has the ability to take care of its own underprivileged people through its institutions, it will be in a much better position to negotiate its cultural priorities with the government. Otherwise, the government will use freebies and subsidies as a way of undermining the Hindu society. So I am not going to make the secular argument that the subsidy or freebie as a policy is an economic blunder. I am saying it's a civilizational disaster for two reasons. It cultivates a sense of entitlement, makes people lazy, and three, completely makes the society dependent on the state. And when a society becomes completely dependent on the state, it loses its negotiating power on the table, and it loses its ability to dictate terms to the state. That, according to me, is the current state of the Hindu society. While it may think of itself as being a majority, it is in reality an orphan society which has no ability of its own, because from its temples to its cultural institutions are controlled by the government. And I say this with no disrespect to any government, but regardless of who is in power, whether it is pro-Hindu or whatever it is, no government has the business of controlling Hindu institutions in any manner.
Yes.
And on that, there can't be any negotiation possible. Once you have these priorities clear, then the society has the ability to bargain and dictate terms and then say, you will be voted back to power provided the Places of Worship Act is repealed by so and so period. That negotiating power has to start. Second, the reason why I asked you this question is, a lot of people who are interested in discussing these topics end up creating anonymous profiles on Facebook because they don't want their identities to be recognized, because they're afraid of repercussions in the office spaces, in schools and whatnot. The day you don't feel the need to create an anonymous profile to express these thoughts is the day you have seriously expressed your intention to see this through. 3, I said this a few days ago in Chennai in a talk, which is that no institution in this country is free from the influence of public opinion, and the seriousness of an institution towards your cause is, to put it in mathematical terms, directly proportional to your expression of seriousness. Whether it is the judiciary or the executive or the legislature, you have to show that you mean business and this matters to you. Then they take it seriously. I would assume that the growing degree of awareness within the Hindu society is perhaps the reason for a certain change of tune on the part of certain actors and stakeholders, which is good, which is fantastic. This is exactly what we've been waiting for. Now, as far as the legality of what has happened is concerned, I'm giving you ammunition which you can use in your private Facebook discussions and Twitter discussions. So here is the astra I'm giving to you. Everybody says that because there is a Places of Worship Act, the very act of undertaking a survey is illegal. That's been the standard, and dare I say the stupid argument that's been presented in public domain. According to me, that's an unlettered, ignorant argument because nobody has read the legislation. Anyone who says this does not understand language at all in the first place. Forget whichever script. There is a specific section 4 which has a subsection 3 under which there are exceptions carved out, which clearly say that any exercise that is undertaken within the meaning of, let's say, for the purposes of archaeology or to protect it as a heritage monument is exempt from the application of the Places of Worship Act. Now the question is, if the act bars the change of religious character, what is the purpose of ascertaining the religious character? Well, the purpose of ascertaining religious character is to know what happened, what is the history of the place. And second, the act is not permanent according to me. The act is certainly not permanent according to me because what the legislature gives, it can take away. Now, during the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, the original position of the other side, people constantly ask the Hindus, why aren't you fighting for hospitals? Why are you fighting for temples? Surprisingly, that question was never put to the other side. And it's not as if they were fighting for that property to build a hospital later. Right? So this question needs to be reframed. The first argument of the other side was, there was no destruction, there was no temple. The second argument was, if at all there was a temple, well, it must have collapsed because of an earthquake, and using the material of the temple, the subsequent structure was built. All these questions were put to rest after the Allahabad High Court directed an archaeological excavation, and then the facts were crystal clear, they were evident. I think what is happening in Kashi is a peaceful way of achieving the same objective, and fortunately a legal and a statutory way of getting the job done. According to me, the Archaeological Survey of India must undertake this activity without the need for a court direction across 40,000 sites which are currently under occupation. The popular misconception is that this is a Hindu versus Muslim argument. What most people don't realize is for the people who have lived in the Konkan, it is also a Christian argument. Because of the Portuguese Inquisition, all the pies that you see in Karnataka and the pies that you see in Kerala have been driven out of Konkan, thanks to the Portuguese Inquisition. There's a fantastic book on this issue by this gentleman called A.K. Priolkar, called the Goan Inquisition. Please read it. The number of temples that were destroyed. Most people think that the British man was the first colonizer of this country. No, it was the Portuguese who was the first colonizer. Madras was founded by the Portuguese, as it existed then. What exists as the St. Thomas Mount Basilica was the original Kapalishwar temple. And the Puranas identify this temple as being on the side of the shore, not within the city. It had to be pushed within the city because just as Kashi, the Shivalinga had to be carried from the shore to the heart of the city in Mylapore to protect it from desecration and destruction. So which is why the book I have tried to say 2 waves of colonization and invasion at the very least. So for the Places of Worship Act to go, I think you must build on the existing momentum and ensure that it becomes a specific issue in the election manifesto for the state as well as for 2024. Only then it achieves a certain degree of seriousness. I hope that answers the question. Yes. So I'll come back to you, sir. Let them finish the question. I'll come back to you. Yes.
Namaste. My
Namaste.
name is Venkatesh Babu. Yeah. My question to you is, there are 2 questions. One, role of Gandhi in was there a role of Gandhi in making Bharath to India? Second question, as you said, I also follow on Twitter and then I've seen many of your videos. You said you're against freebies, but you support for reservation.
Right.
Your call on that. Thank you.
I'll answer both questions. I think it's a fantastic question. Thanks for actually pointing out this inconsistency. So let me come to the reservation question first. You see, here is a situation where the Hindu community at this point is looking at massive silent conversions. And you have to find a way to hold these people back. In fact, in 2 speeches just a few months ago, I addressed this very specific question to say, the best way to kill the Hindu identity is by expanding the scope of reservations. And reservations will now slowly be pushed into the private sector. That talk has already started. That is, according to me, a single unmissable weapon of finishing the Hindu community in one stroke. Because after that, you will forget everything else and you'll be busy fighting amongst yourself. That's the end of the matter. So the alternative that I've proposed is that the funds of the temple must be earmarked for education and upliftment of those truly marginalized communities, with the temple taking responsibility for their education significantly. That way we ensure that the funds of the temple are used for those who believe in the temple. And second, that you also have an alternative to the reservation system. I am not going to discuss the merits of the reservation system. I am simply proceeding on the basis that once a society becomes used to a certain freebie, it's very difficult to take it back. As a student, I've traveled in unreserved compartments. You will always be angry as long as the other person is sitting, but the moment you sit, you think it's your right. That is the nature of reservation. Those who are angry at reservation, if the very same benefit were to be extended to you, would your community say no? We are not sure. We don't know. So it's not a question of being against reservation in principle, it is a question of you being left out of reservation. That is the hypocrisy of the question. Not aimed at you, I'm saying in general that's been the issue. Therefore, you have to find a replacement to that particular problematic solution. if you cannot offer a replacement to it, you are going to create a deeper caste-related discussion, when in fact there are bigger problems to look at. So my suggestion has been that major temples whose funds are being used for non-Hindu purposes should start diverting it in this particular direction. That's one option. And the second thing is, at least for the last 15 years, there has been a discussion on at least removing the creamy layer from the reservation category. As a society, you have not been able to agree to even remove the creamy layer after generations of at least 2 generations of people enjoying that, and you think you're ready for removal of reservations? Look at the level of our preparation. We are not. I've said this again, at least in multiple places, that there must come a point where some communities come forward and say, we don't need reservations anymore. That change has started in Tamil Nadu, of all the places, which has the highest reservation in the country, 69% constitutionally, which is unconstitutional. Because over 50% is not possible, but an exception was created to Tamil Nadu. Thanks to Dravidianism, that state has become an exceptional state for all the wrong reasons. I say this bluntly. I have a serious problem with their ideology. I think it's a cancer. It's the single biggest reason for proliferation of conversions in this part of the country. And you will see how it will spill over to other states. I have a huge request to make of non-Tamil states in the south. Please protect yourself from Dravidianism. Let that cancer not bite you. I say this. I'm sure, absolutely sure I'm going to get hate mail for this and trolling for this, but that's okay, I don't mind. This has to be said, I'm saying this. You will start seeing Dravidianism being pushed through your movies. It'll start. Because pop culture has become a weapon to quickly spread an idea. That has already started in the Telugu film industry. I've been watching it. I'm a huge fan, I'm a huge movie buff, and especially when it comes to Pauranika movies, I go absolutely bonkers. But I've been seeing what's happening there. Wait and watch before this enters the Kannada film industry, it'll start. So stop it as soon as possible. Do not give Dravidianism a space anywhere, neither politically, nor socially, nor culturally. It should not find breathing space at all. Now, coming to the first part of your question, I don't think there is any individual whose balance sheet reads perfectly assets and zero liabilities, to put it in your language. Individuals are mixed bags. So on certain issues, you will find that you agree with Gandhi. On certain issues, you will never be able to agree with Gandhi. I refuse to call him Mahatma. I've never called him Mahatma. I will not call him Mahatma. For me, he's just Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. I don't think you should deify someone so much. If Shri Rama can be criticized, why should Gandhi not be criticized? Is Gandhi bigger than Rama, who he worshipped? He's not. And he was a politician, not a saint. He was a politician, not a saint. Remember that. Keep telling yourself that each time you're tempted to worship a politician, regardless of whoever he is or she is. I mean, from a land of Dravidian Nadu which speaks of rationality and which was falling at the feet of politicians, I mean, it's surprising that they speak of rationality. They will not fall at the feet of gods, but they will fall at the feet of politicians. That is the hypocrisy of Dravidianism. Coming to your question, you have to realize that he had his notions of dharma which were fairly clear in certain respects. However, the problematic part of his history is his attitude towards the riots. And you don't have to go to the riots of, let's say, during the partition of 1946-47, the direct action day riots, nothing. You just read his reactions to the Mopla riots of 1921. And this gentleman was giving the same advice to the Jews as he was giving to the Hindus. He was asking the Jews to walk into the gas chambers. He was asking the Hindus to go and die. He said this as much in both places. I think he needed professional help at some stage. Simply because someone who is asking a community to surrender itself to mass slaughter is not speaking from a position of responsibility at the very least. Whether he is speaking from a position of sanity or not, I leave it to your best judgment. If I decide to say I will sacrifice my life in the interest of peace, that's a decision that I take with respect to me. The consequences are for me alone to face. I have no right to ask a community to sacrifice itself at the altar of peace. Community's first right is to protect itself and to preserve itself, not to surrender itself at the altar of this mythical unity. So therefore, there are some serious problems. So in the context of Gandhi versus Jinnah, I would say there is a problem with his assessment of the situation. In the context of Gandhi versus Ambedkar, you will be surprised that he gave fantastic responses to some of Ambedkar's positions. So it's a question of issue and it's a question of who he was being pitted against. So I believe that he is a mixed bag, but the net result is perhaps he has induced a certain degree of servility and docility in the community, which is the serious problem. The Hindu Kshatra spirit should have been revived. So as part of the second book, which the pre-order link is just out, it's called India, Bharath and Pakistan, the constitutional journey of a sandwiched civilization. India, Bharat and Pakistan, that's the title of the book, which is Bharat is stuck between India and Pakistan. As far as the revolutionary movement is concerned, you should see how from 1857 onwards, right until the 1940s, there are parallel armed resistance movements across the country, Bengal and Punjab being two focal points or foci. The amount of trouble that they gave to the British in 1909, which is when the concept of separate electorates for Muslims was introduced under what is known as the Minto Morley reforms, bomb blasts in the year starts with bomb blasts in Bengal, both Bengals, because by then Bengal has been partitioned into Bengal and Eastern Bengal and Assam. So bomb blasts there. An attempt at the life of the Viceroy in Ahmedabad. Ambala is seeing bomb blasts. Persons and public prosecutors and policemen who are trying cases against revolutionaries were murdered and killed in broad daylight. Daring activities. Today you call them terrorism, but I call it revolutionaries. The amount of effort that they put in. Shri Aurobindo was a revolutionary at the end of the day before he became a saint. He was arrested in the Alipur bomb case because he was actively participating in bomb manufacturing. I am proud of that legacy. I will not run away from that legacy. If I have to choose between his legacy and Gandhi's legacy, I will always go with Shri Aurobindo. Hindutva is not the product of Savarkar, it is the product of three people first, in fact 4 people first. Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal and Shri Aurobindo. Because these were the first people to have a serious disagreement with the Congress's peaceful policy with the British. Saying you're asking for equal rights from a colonizer, you must be crazy. The man doesn't even think of you as being racially equal. How is he going to treat you as an equal subject of rights? I focus on these parts of the history as part of the second book. That period witnessed a lot of people. So some people who we worship out of convenience may have certain negative aspects to them. And some people who we hate may have certain positive aspects to them. I think it's a question of how you balance it out ultimately. So that's my answer. Hopefully I have not been diplomatic in answering your question. Next.
Namaskaram, Shankar
yes.
Kaujalgi.
Namaste.
My question was basically, we call it as learned professionals or learned councils. Is it not our duty to focus on the content than the form? We say substance over the form. The cover may be the India to Bharat. Are we not focusing on the content, what is required to be in Bharat? Are we only sensitizing or highlighting India to Bharat? Is it not our duty to educate the society or the community, being a professionals?
Is it possible for you to rephrase the question a bit more so that I understand it better?
See, as an learned counsel, maybe you are an advocate. So it is our duty as a learned professionals to educate the society from India to Bharat.
Bharat, correct.
So to equip that, so to be a Bharat, are we not focusing enough on the content, the substance in the Bharat?
Right.
We are only changing the cover of the book, not the content of the book.
Correct, correct.
So is it not our duty to focus on the content of the country rather than changing the name of the country?
So,
as a parent or a guardian, I am focusing more on titling my kid rather than upliftment of the kid.
I think you're
as
right.
a guardian of the country.
100% you're right.
Yeah.
So let me give you this example. Which is why I said that name change is not the goal. Psychological change is where it has to begin. So I'll give you one example. Let's go back to education. If someone says that the best way to Indianize, or let's say Bharatiyaize our education system, is to teach in our native languages, you will still be teaching foreign content in native languages. That's even worse. Because then, children are going to consume alien content in their mother tongues, with the impact being even deeper. So when someone speaks of making our content even more Bharatiya when it comes to the educational system, Namaskara sir, at the end, the person at the back, he knows I have recognized him, yes. So as far as the content is concerned, the focus has always been on changing the substance first. So when it comes to mathematics, what is the point of translating Leibniz theorem from English to Kannada? I'd rather want to talk about Bhaskara, I'd want to talk about Aryabhatta, I'd want to talk about other people, right? So I completely agree with you. The only disagreement perhaps I may have, and a very limited disagreement, is that I will not dismiss the question of Namakarana fully. Both are important. I'm only saying, and I agree with you, that purely changing the name is a superficial change. I agree with you, and therefore content has to be changed first. But as people who believe in the sound of power, or rather the power of sound, names matter a lot. You can call someone Surya, or you can call him Shams, which is from Arabic. Shamsuddin, you can call him that. Or you can call him Surya of Dharma. Okay? Shamsuddin is someone who is the son of the deen, or the religion. So I don't want anybody in my family to be named Shams. I want them to retain Surya. But it can't just be Surya who's reading something else. If you're Surya, you read the Bhagavad Gita. I agree with you. Read something else if you want to, but your roots are this. Your loyalty is to this. Your origins are this. This is where you come from. That clarity must exist. Next.
In the interest of time, this would be the last question, sir. Please proceed.
Sure. Please note, I am not running away from questions. They're asking me to run away from questions. Sure, I don't have a problem. Yes.
Hi, Karthik here. One small play of words. Swatantra we have understood as Swaha Tantra, probably in all the pillars of democracy. Having
Right.
said that, do you really hope that the judiciary, executive can be decolonized at all at any point of time?
Okay. Did you ever anticipate a time when, despite the Places of Worship Act, somebody has allowed survey of the place? Could this have been possible a few years ago? Think of it. There was a time when Article 370 was existing in the vacuum. Nobody had hopes of any of this happening. I've said this at least on 3 occasions. What happened in 2014, 16th of May, is not the product of an individual, but is the product of a society's yearning. Society has thrown up certain options, which means that the society is ready for that particular journey, or at least it is eager to go on that particular journey. It has clearly said, enough is enough. Otherwise, there is no way that anything that I put out by way of content will ever be read or heard by anyone. Clearly, that shows that there is an audience that is willing to consume and also produce this particular content. Judges are not parachuted from the heavens. They come from the society. And the very same society will also produce people who are Bharatiya in their thinking. It's not as if it has not. There was a time in the 70s and 80s when most Chief Justices of the Supreme Court were people who were Sanskrit scholars. P.B. Gajendra Gadkar was authoring a book, in fact a series on Upanishads, when he passed away. In most judgments that defined Hinduism, Hindutva and Hindu Dharma, they were citing not foreign scholars such as Monier Williams. They were citing works by Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, by Ramakrishna Mission, or by authentic Sampradayic Hindu scholars. This used to happen in the 70s and 80s. So I'm not going to give up on the judiciary entirely, because after all, it's my fraternity and I've seen how there is a manifest change. Given the positions I hold and the opinions I have on sensitive topics, I should expect myself to be completely isolated in my profession, which is not the case. On the contrary, there is an eager audience that is willing to consume my content on the professional side as well as on the cultural side. As much as I am known for my skills when it comes to lawyering, I am equally known for my ability to speak on these particular subjects, which is not a function of my talent alone, because talent is useless if there is no audience that is willing to consume it. Who are you going to talk to? You'll be shouting up the wrong wall. You'll be a madman shouting on the streets. What is the point? The best part is that there is a significant youth demographic which is interested and invested in this. Civil service aspirants coming from underprivileged families whose fathers and mothers are farmers and whose primary medium of instruction and education has been Kannada or Tamil or whatever it is, have chosen to take up civil services because of these talks and others. Not just me, there are so many other people who are doing this. This city itself has one of the finest Indic intellectuals that I've come across so far, Sandeep Balakrishna. Whenever possible, in the next session, you should try and invite him. He is the author of Invaders and Infidels. He runs this popular portal called Dharma Dispatch. And through him, I have heard of D.V. Gundappa. So I think there is a fantastic young population that is consuming it and is also acting on it. Some have changed their career paths altogether to serve this particular cause. The reality of human society is 80% typically follows the 20%. So the goal is not to invest in the 80% and destroy your life. Your goal is to produce the 20% which can influence the rest of the 80%. That way it's a much more manageable and handleable problem. Otherwise, in a population of 1.4 billion with about 800 million Hindus, hopefully, and we don't know how many of them are practicing Hindus, we don't know. How many of them are cryptos, we have no idea. So I am going to assume that at best the Hindu population in this country which is practicing and which is committed would perhaps be 55 to 60 crores and not beyond. That is my estimation of it. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm happy about it. And if I'm right, I'm terribly sad about it. Now in that population, even if there is, let's say, a 5 to 10 crore population which is willing to commit itself to it, and which moves into public services, which moves into public life, which moves into the judiciary, which moves into policy analysis, into strategic analysis, international affairs, then I think effectively the job is done, at least for the next 2 generations. So the goal is to produce a critical mass of people who are in a position to aspire for such positions and who are in a position to commit to it for life. I'm an optimist. I'm never going to give up. I'm a realist optimist. I'm aware of the realities and accordingly I temper my optimism, but the hope is that we will reach that goal come what may. We have seen worse. The only problem today is that the maximum amount of traitors come from within the community on every issue. The maximum number of crude and vulgar jokes on the Shivalinga were cracked by Hindus and not non-Hindus in Kashi with respect to that incident. That is the primary problem you have to deal with, not anything else. I hope that answers the question. Are we done? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Sai, for this thought-provoking, explosive statements bar answers, which some of us might strongly agree, some of us here might strongly disagree, and some of us might agree to disagree, but nevertheless has given us food for thought. This has been a stirring Saturday morning discussion. Thank you so much. I now request the sons and daughter of late C.A.S. Krishnaswamy, Mr. Chandrasekhar and Jagadamba to come on to the dais and present Mr. Sai a memento as our token of appreciation and gratitude. I'd also request Sir's daughter-in-law Lalita Chandrasekhar and son-in-law Mr. Kumar and CA Devendrappa onto the dais for a photo. I also request CA Lakshmikanta sir onto the dais. I'd like to mention that Mr. Sai Deepak's book is available for sale at the counter in the exhibition. If any of the delegates here want to have a look, want to purchase, please feel free to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for Sai Deepak and Jnanasagar CAS Krishnaswamy sir's family and friends.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you so much. You got tears into my eyes. It's almost a year. I just want to make one sentence before I leave. My mother was in the hospital. Yeah, my mother was in the hospital. My dad went to his office. He called up his wife. He said, Rajam, your husband is wearing turtling shirt. He has inserted. He has worn his shoes. Are you proud of your husband? He is 92 years old. He said that. And he said, I'm in the office. I'm working. Are you proud of me? He said, at late 80s he was talking about he stopped learning. No. At 91, 92 he was talking about MLAI. He said, taking your scan of the retina, using some appropriate algorithms, the doctor can say, this guy is not suffering from cholera. He is suffering from some other ailment. He would study even the algorithms to know what exactly causes different diseases, the patterns. He would discuss that with my daughter who works for Google. So that is the amount of passion he had, not restricted to CA, your subjects alone, but MLAI, the nutrients. Thank you so much again. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
2 days before his death, he called Rakesh. Rakesh, I am coming to the home. Come down on Saturday afternoon. You have to complete the last article to the KCA. That is his spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sir in his 90s were almost 10 years ahead of us that we are today in terms of knowledge and enthusiasm. So we are indeed very blessed. Thank you so much.